Okay, folks, I think we should probably get started and just use the time that we late career people have remaining to us well wisely. I'm Elizabeth Hansen. I was one of the two co-chief negotiators in this round of bargaining. The other is Rob Hickey. The purpose of this meeting is to talk more about the what than the why of the UPP. That is, to make it as clear as we possibly can to all members what the implications of this change means for them. But I thought that it would be worthwhile just to start us off by a recapitulation of why we're here. And I apologize to those of you that have heard this before. It may not feel as repetitious to you as it does to us, because we've been saying some of these things so often to so many different audiences now. So, as I said, I was co-chief negotiator in this round of bargaining, but I was on the bargaining team in 2011 and was chief negotiator in 2015. So my context for looking at this issue is the recent bargaining history at Queen's. And in 2011, those of you that were here will recall that we came within a couple of hours of going on strike or being locked out, principally over changes to the QPP. And that round of bargaining resulted in an increase in contribution rates for our members, no corresponding increase for the university. And that compulsion was in response to the situation that the university found itself in, with substantial deficits in the pension plan with respect to both solvency and going concern. And so we had that round of bargaining, but immediately the university was nevertheless confronted with the solvency payment regime that the province had imposed on it, and it had at that point temporary solvency relief. It now, the way things stand, is that there's a $31.6 million going concern deficit for the pension and a $313.4 million solvency deficit, with the university having begun making solvency payments this year that currently amount to about a 6% tax on operating budgets of units. So in the wake of that situation that really begins around 2011, the university began to make noises about rolling up the QPP and merging it with the CAT plan, the Colleges of Applied Arts and Technology plan, which is a jointly sponsored pension plan. And that means that the university would be able to get out of making the solvency payments. It's just a rule that if you're in a JSPP, you don't have to make solvency payments. But the CAP plan was an extremely unattractive option because its contribution rates were very high, its benefits were very poor, and it was not designed for university career paths and professors' needs. So QUFA began in concert with the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations and other unions in discussing the possibility of designing a sector-specific jointly sponsored pension plan. And when we went into bargaining in 2015, that process had begun. QUFA was very interested, along with Queen's, in being at that table because we have a unique pension plan, a hybrid plan, and Rob will explain more about that. And it was important that the interests of our our different kind of plan be represented in that context. At bargaining in 2015, since that process had begun, the university was quite interested in ensuring that we agreed to stay in that design process. From our perspective, the university's desire to have us be helpful partners in that process meant that we had a much more constructive round of bargaining than we did in 2011. at the time, we agreed that, that is in 2015, that were the UPP to be built and the consent process was to fall within 6 months of the expiry of the 2015-2019 agreement, that any consent would be bargained as part of normal collective bargaining. And that's what happened, although because of the consent timetable, we couldn't use our normal bargaining processes and timetables. So we did an accelerated round of bargaining in December, focused on bargaining offsets for consent, so that the new pension plan that we could then recommend to our members would be as attractive as we could possibly make it. In exchange for those offsets, the university made the condition of all the terms that it bargained, QUFA's consenting to the conversion of the QPP to the UPP. So the vote that's facing you now is a combined vote to ratify this new collective agreement and at the same time to instruct QUFA to consent on your behalf to that conversion. So it's in aid of allowing you to make an informed decision in that process that we're attempting to make sure that every single QUFA member who is a member of the QPP understands the implications of this conversion and can cast their vote wisely and in their own interests as they judge them to be. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Rob Hickey, my co-chief negotiator, and he will walk you through the differences of the two plans and then take questions about how they're going to implicate you in particular.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I know the glare on the screen makes these slides pretty much useless. We do have handouts if folks grab those. It's the top of page 3 is kind of what I'll focus on. And it's a bit ironic. I think today's session, we're probably going to have the best turnout that we have across all of our 3 sessions of early career, mid-career, late career. You are the folks who are perhaps most in tune with the importance of changes in pension. But at the same time, these changes will also probably have the least material impact on you. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So what I'm going to go through are some of the kind of basic features of the Queen's pension plan versus what the proposed university pension plan has. And before I get started, I should note that the reason I say that this presentation will have the least material impact on you is that everything that you've earned under the Queen's pension plan, you retain regardless of what happens with consent or conversion. Meaning if there is the creation of the UPP, all of the accrued benefits, all of the benefits you've earned under the QPP up to this point are replicated under the UPP. The way that you accrued those benefits in the hybrid plan, the value of your money purchase, the way that indexation will work, everything is replicated. Nevertheless, let me go through a few of the key features which I still think are important in terms of considerations, even if you've already earned all the benefits that you will accrue for your pension income security. The first item is the kind of nature of the plan design. At Queen's, we have a hybrid design, which is kind of a combination of a minimum guarantee, so that's the defined benefit nature, which sets out a formula for establishing your benefit based upon the accrual rate, kind of the percentage below and above the yearly maximum pensionable earnings, multiplied by your years of service and your final average salary, essentially. And that's what the nature of a defined benefit plan is. It sets your benefit, and you have that minimum guarantee regardless of how well the pension fund is doing in terms of investment return or in terms of market fluctuations at the time of retirement. We have a hybrid plan, so in addition to looking at the minimum guarantee, any of you who have gone in or look at your annual pension statement will see that if you've been at Queen's for more than 20 years, usually your money purchase is beginning to pay out better benefits than your minimum guarantee. And the money purchase is more like a defined contribution plan, where the employer and you have put monies into the pension plan over the years, and depending upon investment returns at the time of retirement, that creates an annuity, and for long-serving, high-salary employees, that generally beats the minimum guarantee at Queen's. And that's the unique feature of the pension plan, and that's perhaps what makes our decision around conversion the biggest challenge, is that we're going from a hybrid plan, which feels like we're getting kind of the best of both worlds, into a strictly defined benefit plan. And when we look from a kind of a union or employee perspective, having the security and stability of a defined benefit plan is inherently better for employees, meaning you don't carry the kind of market risk that you would in a defined contribution or money purchase plan, and employees prefer it, employers don't, and that's why over the last 30 or 40 years we've seen defined benefits decline substantially across Canada. One other thing to say about plan design, and I think perhaps one of the more important considerations for you, is the second line in terms of governance. Currently, the Queen's plan is a solely sponsored plan. While QUFA has kind of veto authority, we can bargain over proposed changes. Ultimately, the administration and management of the plan falls to the Board of Trustees. So investment decisions, managing the assets, holding the administration of the plan accountable is the sole responsibility of that single sponsor. The jointly sponsored pension plan is just that. It's jointly sponsored, meaning all of the employers form one sponsor side of the table, and all the labor sponsors form the other side, and it's jointly administered by the two sponsors, essentially. So the governance structure allows for employee oversight and accountability in ways that simply do not exist in single employer sponsored plans. And so that's an important shift. Why is it important? Well, having that governance feature gives employees the right to say, well, rather than taking a contribution holiday, we want to provide kind of an extra oomph to the indexation this year, right? So you can have other ways of handling surplus, and employees have a direct vote or a direct voice in saying, how do we handle unfunded liabilities should those occur? So you carry the authority to have governance input, but you also share then the responsibilities for managing risk. The shift from hybrid to fully defined benefit was something we had to carefully consider in terms of, well, how much value is there for most faculty and librarians in terms of the money purchase side of our hybrid plan? Meaning, most of us, if we've been long serving, will retire with a pension that's higher than our minimum guarantee. And in part, this kind of depends upon the luck of the draw, if you will. If you retired in 2008, 2009, you went out on the minimum guarantee. Why? Because the market tanked and your defined contribution didn't have any assets over and above the minimum guarantee. Last few years, or at least up until October, the market was doing quite well, and I think we've seen an increase in the proportion of faculty and librarians who have been retiring, so money purchase provides an enhanced benefit over the minimum guarantee. And when we look at the long-run effects of what that added value is for faculty members, it came out to about a 10% enhancement in the value of your pension. Now, under the UPP, the accrual rate, and that's the kind of factor that establishes what the value of your benefit will be, it increases. It increases from the current accrual rates of the QPP of 1.4, which is the below the yearly maximum pensionable earnings, and that's set by Canada Pension Plan, set by the CRA, and 1.8% for earnings above. And those increase to 1.6 and 2%, and that, if you do the math on that, that's about a 12.4% increase in the value of the average member's pension benefit. So it hit or slightly exceeded our target for how can we compare a hybrid plan to a fully defined benefit plan. And again, it's It's not perfect. There will be some individuals who did better on money purchase than 12%, but there are a lot of people going out on minimum guarantee who would have an enhanced pension benefit under this higher accrual rate. So those are important changes. Now, along with the enhanced benefits, though, are enhanced contributions, enhanced payments. And so the next couple of lines that you can't see up there, but you can see in your handouts, we currently pay 7% for earnings below the yearly maximum pensionable earnings. So in 2019, that's $57,400, and we pay 9% for earnings above that. And those go up under the UPP to 9.2 and 11.5. So just to give you a sense, the UPP is established as a pension based upon a 20% of payroll contribution. Now, it seems a little odd that you have 9.2 and 11.5, and that's just the mathematical formula needed to provide those accrual rates of 1.6 and 2.0. For us, it'll mean increases in contributions, and that's about a 2.4% of salary increase for your average QUFA member. It's about 28% increase in contributions, but it's just about 2.5% of salary. And it becomes a 50-50 split. So you see there that the employer currently pays slightly below the employee in terms of our monthly contribution rates. Queens pays 6% below and 7.5% above. Now those numbers are a little deceiving because that doesn't include their special solvency payments. So if we included those in there, you know, Queens would be probably paying more than us on that formula. But since solvency payments don't really contribute to our benefits, they're just paying for past beneficiaries, the increase in Queen's contribution is a direct increase to our total compensation. The next feature, and this is important because as I'll show below, there is a change to the Queen's pension plan. Currently under the Queen's pension plan, your normal retirement date is July 1st in the year after you turn 65. So all of you with August or September birthdays will be glad to hear that that's going to change. Under the UPP, it's already established to be the last day of the month in which you turn 65, and that's a change that we negotiated to QPP as well. The next item is perhaps the biggest change that the administration put on the table in terms of inducing conversion to the UPP, and that's that currently the Queen's plan has no provisions for early unreduced retirement. So if you wanted to retire at 60, you certainly can, but you're paying essentially a penalty for every year before you turn 65 or every year before you reach that normal retirement date. Under the UPP, it has what's referred to as the factor 80, meaning if you've reached age 60 and your combination of age and years of service equal at least 80, you have no reduction in your pension, at least no kind of artificial charge against your pension. Your pension at 60 won't be as large as your pension at 65. Why? Because pensions are based upon years of service, right? So if you work another 5 years, your pension is going to be larger because you have 5 additional years of contributions. What does change, and if you look at your pension statement, currently your pension statement shows you what your pension will be at 60 and at your normal retirement date at 65. And your estimation at 60 may be, close to the money purchase. So you have the money purchase on top, the minimum guarantee below that. And for myself, and probably for a lot of folks, reducing that charge for early retirement will make my money purchase make my minimum guarantee more valuable than my money purchase. So it's the rough calculation is about a 10% enhancement by doing away with that early retirement charge. And that's one change that I'll get to that Queens is offering. They will match that model that is established under the UPP if we agree to consent to conversion. The last item I want to highlight, because this is probably the one that has the most concern for you, is how do we manage indexation? And indexation is how do you protect your value, the value of your pension from inflation over time. And Queens has a somewhat, not entirely rare, but uncommon formula for indexation. So under the Queens pension plan, retirees will realize enhancements to their pension benefit if the Queens pension plan has investment returns above 6%. And for many people since 2011, 2012, the pension plan has had some really fantastic years, 12%, 17%, and so Queens retirees can experience some robust returns. But that doesn't always happen. So if you talk to colleagues, and I replaced my colleague Pradeep Kumar, who retired, I think, in 2005, 2006. If he retired and then experienced the dip in 2008, some of our colleagues who have retired haven't seen any indexation since before 2008. They haven't experienced a reduction in their pension, but they're still waiting for the returns to kind of bring their pension back up above the global financial crisis. So the model of indexation that Queens currently has can be really good if you retire at the right time and you ride the market waves in the right session, but it can also result in no protection against inflation for pretty significant periods of time if there's a significant market adjustment. Under the UPP, and I should say that all of your Queens pension plan benefits, you know, if you've worked 28 years in the Queens plan and 2 years in the UPP, those 28 years, the indexation formula will be replicated exactly as it is. Now you might say, well, is that a good or a bad thing? I think we felt that it was important to kind of protect this principle of replication, that it's generally good for many pensioners. It does provide more risk in terms of a stable, certain pension indexation formula. Under the UPP, it has the more common formula, which is 75% of the consumer price index. Now, you know, some people will feel, well, that's guaranteed to lose value over time. That's true, but it provides a stable and certain protection mostly against inflation. So our colleagues who retired, who haven't seen any indexation increases over that 10-year period, would be much better off if Queens would have had the 75% of CPI. So that indexation formula will apply to any benefits accrued under the UPP, but all of your benefits accrued under the Queens pension plan, so up until conversion, your indexation will be based upon those investment returns. And so your real question to me is, well, what will our returns be, right? And of course, if I knew what the investment returns would be for the plan going forward, I probably wouldn't be teaching at Queens. I'd be doing something much more lucrative. But one could assume that participating in a much larger investment portfolio will reduce the fees associated with fund management and hopefully have at or better returns than what the Queens plan has been able to do on its own. Now, there are a couple of features that aren't retained in the UPP and could impact you in terms of depending upon when your retirement date is scheduled. And those two features are the artifact of the ending of mandatory retirement back in 2004, 2005, and the access to commuted value. So let me take on the first one in terms of the artifact of mandatory retirement. You might recall that when mandatory retirement was eliminated, there was no associated change in the Queen's pension plan. Up until that point, you hit 65, you stopped working, you started collecting your pension. Well, without mandatory retirement, we hit 65, we could activate our pension and continue to work. And for some of our QUFA colleagues, that works out really well. And it primarily works out really well because the federal government introduced pension income splitting. So if your spouse had low earnings or low pension, you were able to shelter your pension from taxation by taking advantage of pension income splitting. But overall, most of our members find that that isn't the better choice. The better choice is to continue to work and to continue to accrue pension credits. So in bargaining, we asked for the data on how many of our members are between 65 and 71 and have activated their pension and continuing to work, versus how many of our members are between 65 and 71 are working and continuing to accrue pension credits. And it was about 75% are continuing to accrue pension credits. Why? Well, because it really enhances your pension in ways that are quite surprising. So if you go to the Queen's Pension website, they have this cool little thing called the Pension Self-Service Calculator. And you can look to see, okay, they draw your information right out of the Queen's administrative database, so it has what your account balance is, it knows your birthday, it knows your normal retirement date. So I was able to look at, okay, if I retire at 65, this will be my pension. And then I was able to calculate, based upon a 3% investment return and a 1.5% salary increase over each year, what will my pension be at 68? And it was nearly 20% higher. And that's 20% higher for the rest of my life, which brings you to the biggest question in terms of deciding, is this more valuable to collect it now or to enhance my pension? And that's, how long are you going to live? And we're all, I think, optimistic folks, so I'd like to think we're all going to live a long time, and so enhancing pension credits is the primary option that most of our colleagues make. But that is a loss of choice, and it's obviously not something that we wanted to see. So I should point out that myself and Paul Young were the QUFA reps working with on this project for the past 4 years or so, and we were constantly the voice of saying we need to protect this kind of unique provision. The University of Toronto, the University of Guelph don't have it. Frankly, they weren't particularly sympathetic to our call to protect that, but it wasn't necessarily their fault. It was government saying unequivocally that the university pension plan cannot have this feature of being able to activate your pension and continue to work. And we think it's mostly a result of, you might recall a few years ago when the teachers' pension plan came under fire, when there was the so-called labor market glut of new teachers not being able to get jobs, and then they were pointing at retired teachers who were continuing to teach in the education system. So we think that that's the primary reason why government took such a hard line. That's just speculation on my part, but again, this is a government mandate, not a choice that we would have voluntarily made by QUFA. The other item may be less relevant just because there is a significant phase-in period, but currently under the Queen's model, there's no restrictions on your ability to take the commuted value. And what that means is if you look at your pension statement, you have an account balance. So when you go into the Queen's Pension Office and you say, I want to retire, you can either get an annuity, which is your monthly pension benefit paid out for the rest of your life, or you can take a whack of cash with you and walk out the door. You can take your pension as a lump sum. Some people value that. Maybe they are good investors, maybe they have other kind of plans. It's not something that I would particularly feel comfortable with. I don't think most people want to play the stock market with their entire retirement savings, nor is it necessarily something that you'll be able to do better on by taking your money and going out and buying a different annuity. The Queen's annuity factors are pretty much better than anything you'll find on the open market now. Queen's assumes a 6% return rate on your money purchase benefits going in the future. Most annuity plan or most underwriters have annuity factors that only assume a 3% or 3.2%. So you just cannot match the value of your accumulated earnings if you keep it in Queens versus taking the commuted value and doing something else. That said, you can still do it. You have that choice. And we have a phase-in period where you can continue to access and withdraw the commuted value over a 10-year period, essentially. So if we consent and the UPP is formed, the inception date is anticipated to be July 1st of 2021. And for the first 3 years of the pension plan, you go to retire, you can draw out the entire commuted value, both the benefits accrued under the Queen's plan, as well as any value accrued under the university pension plan. So you can draw the commuted value of both of those accrued benefits. After the 3 years, it's cut off for the benefits accrued under the UPP, but for the next 7 years, you can continue to access the commuted value of your Queen's accrued benefits. So from 2021 to 2031, individuals will still be able to access the commuted value. Again, I'm not saying that that's something I would promote, nor am I saying that losing that choice is something that we would have advocated if we were able to craft the plan design without any constraints, but that is an important change in the plan design. So let me just finish up with a couple of comments about what we've tried to negotiate in terms of some of these changes incur costs, such as increased contribution rates. Some of these changes incur loss of choice, like not being able to access commuted value, or more importantly, not being able to activate your pension and continue to work. So part of what we did in this latest round of bargaining was to explicitly tell the administration that conversion from the Queen's pension plan into the new university pension plan requires some offsets. It requires some payment to QUFA members in order to mitigate the negative impacts of increased costs and loss of choice. So if you look at the bottom half of the page, let me just highlight a few items there that should be of interest. The first one is the victory for all the August birthdays out there, the harmonization with the normal retirement date. But the most significant one, probably the most money that Queen's put on the table to try and induce current Queen's benefit members to consent to the conversion, is introducing early unreduced retirement. So making the feature that will be under the UPP available to Queen's retirees as well. That is the Factor 80 model. So as long as you are 60 years old and have at least 20 years of service, your minimum guarantee will not incur those charges for early retirement. So depending upon the year, it's 2% per year or 3% per year. On average, it'll be about a 5% or about a 10% enhancement to your minimum guarantee benefit at age 60. So that's significant. That's not something that we anticipated that the administration would offer. Why? Because early retirement features are one of the more expensive benefits in pension plans. People are living longer, it costs more, you're enhancing your benefits over the life of the lifetime of the beneficiary. The increase in contribution rates is offset with a one-time salary adjustment of 1.5%. So as I mentioned, the contribution increase is about 2.4%, so it's not a 100% offset. It's about a 66% offset, a 1.5%, and that applies to your pensionable earnings. So if you have earnings above the pensionable max, which is, I think this year about 168 or so, I'm looking for Grant because he's not in the audience today. He always knows that number. But it's essentially an offset to any increases that you'll be paying from your salary to pension. The next feature is something that we're really pleased with in terms of having something that Queens should have had all along, which is a rational program for phased retirement. So when we were looking at various options, we reviewed the University of Toronto phased retirement plan. And in our conversations with the faculty association there, they felt that it worked well, and it was a model that we proposed as one that should be adopted here at Queens. And again, to my surprise, they adopted it without any significant change. And why is that a surprise? Well, because it does come with some valuable features for members. First, it's a 3-year program. And if you think about your work over 3 years and you put it in percentage terms, 300% of your work is 3 years. And what the phased retirement says is that over those 3 years, you reduce your workload so that you're working between 150% and 200% of those across those 3 years. So it could be 50-50-50, could be 75-50-50, right? So you can come up with a combination of how much you reduce your responsibility, and your salary is reduced to fit that reduced responsibility, but your pension credits are still earned at 100% of your nominal salary. So again, if you think about the value of continuing to earn credit while you work rather than activating your pension, the early phased retirement we felt was a really attractive offset to losing the right to activate your pension. In addition to continuing to earn 100% of your pension credit, you get paid a 75% retirement bonus, if you will. And there are a few different ways of taking that. You could take it, a little bit each year to offset your salary reduction. You could take it all at the end of the 3 years, and that would be as a retirement allowance. And that has kind of some tax implications of calling it a retirement allowance rather than taking it on your T4s across those 3 years. But again, you have a few options that allow you to try and maximize the value of that benefit in terms of how you take your salary bonus. Now, a couple of limitations to the early phase retirement is that you have to be at least 62. So you can give indication at 61 and start the phased program at 62, meaning you have to be 65 by the time you're fully retired, and you have to enter the program before or by 68, because you have to be fully retired by the time you're 71. And those are the age parameters or age restrictions for that. And the last thing I should mention here is that we did want to get at least some enhancement for our post-retirement benefits. And you might recall I was also involved in the review of the group benefits plan. And QUFA doesn't represent our retired colleagues. We couldn't bargain on their behalf in terms of retiree benefits, but we could bargain post-retirement benefits within our collective agreement. And it provides retirees with some benefits. So it's kind of an indirect way of trying to enhance retiree benefits, and so we were able to extend the drug card provision to retirees. And that was one of the few things that I heard from our retired colleagues that they would like to see, because as some of you may have discovered already, but others are likely to soon, once you turn 65, you start having to use paper submissions and forms again with Great West Life for some of your for your drug reimbursement. So getting a drug card direct pay for our post-retirement benefit was an enhancement. And those are the main features. Let me pause here. I'll talk a little bit about the kind of consent process, but let's pause for a moment and take any questions either about the plan design or how it might work, if that's okay. Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind just going to the microphone, we're live streaming to colleagues online.
So if this new plan is ratified, When could one take in the reduced responsibility? When would be the earliest start date for that?
Great question. So we negotiated that rather than having to wait until 2021 to notify, you can notify in 2020 for it to begin in 2021. So you would start that process in 2021. Not soon enough, I know, for some of you. The other thing that we had to agree to was there was some concern on the administration's part that there's going to be a rush on the exits. And you might recall in 2010 there was a similar early retirement incentive package. But if you recall then, there was some real concern from our perspective on how they managed who got access to that phased retirement program. It was a bit convoluted, and it caused lots of consternation because they limited it to like one person per unit. Or so what we agreed to is that the administration could deny application for 1 year, but would have to accept it if it was reapplied. So we provided for some authority for the administration to postpone, but not beyond 1 year for applications. And again, that was in response to their concern about oversubscription, but we wanted to make sure that everyone would have access without more than a year's delay if they're under 65.
Hi, thanks. And also, again, thank you both very much for your work on this and the people who've negotiated the pension. Thank you also for how clear it's been, your presentations. I wanted to ask, a number of people have been looking at the phased retirement and are wondering how the reduced work is negotiated. Do we anticipate that the university with QUFA are going to be providing some guidelines for what a 50 or 75% position looks like, or will that be negotiated with individual heads according to the workload agreements in individual departments, or how do you see this happening?
That's a great question, Eleanor. I should probably start by saying that the one thing that is clear within the framework agreement is that reduced responsibility has to retain the full scope of responsibilities. So if you go to a 50% reduced responsibility, it doesn't mean that you eliminate all your teaching and keep all of your research. You have to maintain the spread as you would. Now, what 75% might look like, there may be some negotiations with heads and deans in terms of, well, is that one large course and then you're teaching, so there's going to be some variation on a case-by-case basis. And I think that will just have to be negotiated on the unit level. The main feature that is pretty well established in the framework is that you have to reduce across all your scope of responsibilities.
I think you have clarified this, but the question is just again, exactly how does this phased program work? So I could say you can trigger it in 2020, but you begin the phased or the reduced responsibility 2021, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24, correct?
Right. And another important feature that's on the slide but I didn't highlight, it's important though, is that once you elect to go into the phased retirement program, it's irrevocable. So you're saying 3 years from now I'm done. Things happen, we know, but a year into the phased retirement program, you can't suddenly say, well, I'm feeling pretty good, I'm going to keep going. It does provide heads and deans some certainty in terms of succession planning and in terms of kind of human resource planning as well.
I have another question about the phased, and that is that it is for 3 years. You don't have the option of reducing it to 1 or 2, correct?
That's correct. It's a 3-year program.
Okay. And then I'll do one more and I'll step away and get back in line. So there's a request for clarification. Can you just clarify with the new UPP whether people will be able to delay their pensions after 65. So in other words, this is not coming with a mandatory retirement date of 65.
Absolutely not, no. You'll still be able to continue to work and earn credit, and that's what I meant, that 75% of our colleagues who are in that window continue to do that. There's no requirement to take your pension at 65. There is a requirement to take your pension at 71. And so that's still a CRA rule. And ironically, you're required to take your pension, but of course you're not required to stop working. So you can activate your pension and continue to work at 71. You just won't be able to do so at 65. Sir.
So I have two questions. The first is, what happens if the UPP is not ratified?
Well, I think that's a fundamentally important question. Based upon what Elizabeth said in terms of the bargaining history at Queen's, and the whole reason why QUFA has been engaged in this is that we believe that Queen's is determined to get out of the pension business, meaning they tried to force us to kind of accept the college plan, where we would have paid a lot more and gotten a lot less. But the only way that they can get out of the special solvency payment, which is what they want to do, is to join a jointly sponsored pension plan. And currently, the only two options that I see kind of on the table are the university sector plan, that's kind of what we've developed, or the college plan, because the hospital plan, OMERS, all the other jointly sponsored plans wouldn't take Queen's.
Mm-hmm. Now, the provision with, sort of removing taking pensions without retiring, I mean, for those of us who were anticipating taking advantage of that, that's a huge loss. We're talking about, if you plan on working till 70, that's over $500,000 that's being taken out of our pockets directly. There's no compensation for that in this agreement.
Well, that's partly of why we pushed for the phased retirement. And while the number may seem big on the surface, you have to look at the after-tax earnings. And when you take salary plus pension, you typically go up in terms of your marginal tax rate from 48% to 52%. So what you actually take home in that $100,000 pension benefit may only be about $48,000. And then when you start to offset that against how your pension would be enhanced by continuing to accrue credit, you begin to quickly come to a calculus. And again, we hate to say this, but it all depends on when you're going to die. If you have an enhanced pension for life and you live beyond a certain age, taking that money early actually results in lost value for you. So it's not a question of losing $500,000. It's a question of lifetime earnings. And so this loss of choice is absolutely something that we did not want to have happen. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a loss of value. And what I mean by that is that I think our colleagues are making rational choices, those who are currently in that environment. And 75% say, my choice to continue to work and to continue to earn pension credit is of greater value to me than activating my pension and having a reduced benefit over the rest of my life. So I agree with you. The loss of choice is not something we wanted. And that's why we pushed for the phased retirement program. But I'm not convinced that the value is the same across each member, or that the overall value of this particular feature of the end of mandatory retirement results in a loss of value for everyone.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, as at 2021, if the UPP starts to activate, there's a protection against the loss of value for early retirement, but that protection is not going to start one day before the UPP. Like, it won't come into play in 2020. There's no way we can bring it home sooner.
I'm drawing a blank on my date memory, but I don't believe that.
I think it's at inception.
It's at inception. And I should clarify that inception is the date that the plan that, our benefit accrual stops in the QPP and starts in the UPP. It's anticipated to be July 1st, 2021, but it depends upon government regulators giving final approval and all of the attorneys doing all their paperwork in terms of asset transfer.
Hello. In light of these changes, would QUFA have somebody like, we have a grievance officer, for example, somebody who would be advisor for retirement issues in the transition process?
That's a great question. You know, my first comment is that if you haven't met Bob Weisnagel in the Queen's Pension Office, he may not be a QUFA member, but boy, he's a great advocate for for everyone who's retired from Queen's. And so, you know, the first thing that I would do would be to meet with him, because he'll print off your and go through all of the options in terms of what's better or for worse. And quite frankly, that role will continue for some time, because the QPP, while it may not exist as an administrative body, they're still going to be paying out, you know, Queen's pensions until the last beneficiary of the last person passes away.
When you have a situation of a factor, that factor 80, that rule of years plus service, is there ever any wiggle room for people who are getting very close but don't quite make it?
Yeah, you know, this is one of the things that often seems arbitrary and unfair, that, well, I got, you know, 79.6 by the time I hit this year. I'm not aware of any wiggle room in that formula. You know, if you're close, then it's, you know, there's always the option, if you have to stop working, to defer your pension. There's no requirement. Let's say you're age 58 and you're ill and you need a couple more years, you have enough years of service. You don't have to start taking your pension at 58. In fact, I would say defer it for 2 years until you can access the early unreduced retirement. Why? Well, because if you take it at 58, you get penalized for every year from 65, not from 60. So it would be a massive cut to your pension benefit. And if you're on the edge, defer it until you're across the threshold. Sir.
Just a quick question on the this phased retirement program. So basically it's as you say, 150 to 200% of the 300% of the last 3 years. But then there's a 75% salary bonus.
Right.
So, I mean, it's hard to imagine somebody who would want to not do, at least take the 200%. Then there will only, you know, it's sort of strange.
Yeah,
that anyone would opt
we think
against
that
it.
it's a pretty good plan,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because you're getting paid almost the same.
And if you look at the after-tax implications, so if you take that 75% bonus as what they call a retirement allowance, you're not going to be paying your high salary marginal tax on it.
I guess the value to the university, it must be that it's the certainty that the irrevocableness of that is the thing.
Yeah, we think it's the certainty, and we also think that they realize that they have to kind of come into the modern period of human resource planning, right, of knowing and having a more rational program for faculty renewal. Any other questions on plan design? Yes, sir.
It's been interesting hearing you say about the August birthdays that we'll be so happy. I was born on July 6th, so I'll retire 364 days after I turn 65. But that officially is in 2020.
That's right.
You know, to some extent, what I'm hearing is very interesting, but I don't think applies to me unless, by some miracle, on July 1st, 2021, the 1.6% per year is retroactive, which I don't think it is, but it's just a question.
I see. So the the contribution offset, you mean?
That, well, the rate at which you accrue your
I
retirement
see.
after the inception date
Right. No,
is at a higher rate, but I'm sure it's not retroactive.
No, it's not
Yeah, I
retroactive.
didn't
So,
think so.
like I said, everything that you earned under the QPP, you keep, but it doesn't get bumped up.
Yeah. So it's if you'd retired the day before the inception date, you'd get QPP. The day after, then you would start
Well-
accruing, but you would still be at the same point.
Exactly. So even though, even if you retired, July 6, 2021, you would have had 5 days essentially of benefits at the higher level, right? So
A 0.01% improvement.
yeah. So, and that's why I said at the beginning of this meeting, this has the least material impact on you,
Yeah.
because those higher accrual rates only count for the amount of time that you're working and contributing under the UPP.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, very sorry. I missed something more basic than everyone else has asked about. In the irrevocable early retirement scheme, instead of 300% of service over 3 years, it would be 200%? Is that right?
Well, you have to get it between 150% and 200%.
Okay,
So you
that's
can't
what
go
confused me.
over 200% or under 150%.
All right.
Now, one thing I should correct, because I think I was unprepared for this question at the fall general meeting. People asked about, well, can I take a sabbatical leave during that phased retirement period? And I was kind of caught off guard, and I said, wow, that's really confusing. I don't think so. And that's not correct. We're working out the details, but if you look at the Toronto plan, you can take an academic sabbatical leave during the phase period. It's a little convoluted because you get charged 100% out of that 150 to 200 for that year, but you, of course, still have your sabbatical reduction of 85% of salary. So it'll be part of the program. It's a little more convoluted, but you will be able to take academic leaves during the phase period, and you'll still be able to take academic leave and then retire.
But I did hear someone, possibly was at that meeting, saying it in effect gives you a free semester or a semester leave within that, something like that, or the equivalent
No,
of.
you might have been thinking about, there was one enhancement for continuing adjuncts who are promoted to associate, who are able to secure external grant funding, can get a half-course release.
Yeah, that's different, yeah.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
It was a regular faculty member telling me that they like this feature of the, in effect, and a semester off, but I think that's within the, it's between the 300% and the 150 to 2.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
I understand that better now, too.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Just curious, I spent half my career at another institution, so I have a pension plan there, and I wondered if this affects in any way the portability if I chose to bring that plan to Queens.
Boy, that's a great question. It would depend upon whether there's a reciprocity agreement between those two plans, so
At the moment, there is.
there is. I would imagine that there would still be reciprocity then between the UPP and your former institution, but I don't want to give you any guarantees on that. I think that might be a question for Bob Weisenagel to see, if you should activate that beforehand, or, I mean, what will happen for many people is you'll get a check from that institution with your benefit, and then you'll get your other portion from the other plan.
Although you can use that to buy years of service is
Right.
possible at the moment.
Right, and I think if the Queen's plan recognizes those years of service, those conditions would be replicated under the new plan.
Okay.
That's a good question, though, but I would encourage you to follow up with Bob Weisenagel. Any other questions from the online folks, Leslie? Otherwise, I'll just finish up so you know kind of what to expect over the next couple of weeks in terms of, well, I should say what's in the renewal of the collective agreement. So everything that I focused on is kind of the pension and the pension offsets. We did renew the collective agreement, modest but pretty much on par for what the settlements are across the province. So across the board increases of 1.6, 1.6, and 1.9. So that last year is designed to coincide with the increased contribution rates. So between the 1.9 and the 1.5 salary offset, we would anticipate still having a 1% real across the board increase for QUFA members that third year. And then a couple of other items related to anomaly side tables and the continuing adjuncts. Let me just give you a heads up in terms of the ratification and kind of where this goes. There will continue to be additional information sessions. There's lots of materials on the QUFA website now. You'll be getting kind of an email a week. You'll probably be sick of us by the end. I know I'm kind of tired of talking about pensions, but the electronic voting will start on February 9th, and we picked that day for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to give ourselves enough time to hold these town halls to ensure that we have time to make sure everyone feels informed before they're asked to vote. But also on February 8th, the University of Toronto Faculty Association will be concluding their vote, so you'll see kind of what did Toronto do before we start our vote period. So that happens between the 9th and the 15th. And you'll be getting essentially, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, one question. Do you agree to the changes to the collective agreement, the offsets, and consent to conversion? Leslie.
Yes, it's a question though, so do you want to finish? Are you done with ratification?
No, I think I'm done, yeah.
Okay, so this is a more specific question. Somebody will be 62 in June 2021. They want to retire at 63. They do meet the factor 80. Would they be able to access an unreduced early pension or not?
So if they are 63 in 2022?
Yeah, or 62 by 2021, they will have the factor 80. So at inception of the UPP, they'll be 62 and they'll meet the factor 80.
Yes.
Thank you.
The short answer.
Okay, so can I just make a pitch for everybody to pay as much attention to us as you can possibly stomach? We've got more events. We're going to put information up every week, novel information. And if you have any questions of things, burning questions, please get them into us. It's easy. It's QUFA@queensu.ca, and we will either make sure we get it up in an FAQ and sent back to you, or that somebody writes to you, or that we get you to the right event so you'll hear that answer, or we get the document into your hands. So please don't be shy. Please let us know if you need more information, and please let your colleagues know that all of these efforts are underway, including unit visits. So I think we're up at about 30 or 40 units. If your unit's not in the list, I listed out what we have planned for this week and what we did last week. If you'd like to know if we are planning to come to you, write to ep43@queensu.ca. That's Elizabeth, and she's maintaining the schedule. So we really do want to come and talk to you about your specific concerns if it would be helpful.
I think we had one more question, sir. That's a great question. So the question was, do all three universities have to approve? So the consent process is a fairly complex process, as you might appreciate. It's governed under the Pension Benefit Act. And, the question is, well, what if Guelph doesn't approve? The one thing I would say is that without Toronto, I'd be surprised if this works, because they bring the biggest asset volume to the table. But there's no reason that it wouldn't still succeed if Guelph didn't approve. That said, I would say that the University of Toronto Faculty Association and the Guelph Faculty Association both feel much more confident in terms of their support. Why? Because for them it's an easier question. They're going from a defined benefit plan to a defined benefit plan. For us, I think it's a more difficult question, in terms of commuted value, in terms of activation of pension. There are some loss of choice from a hybrid plan. If we could have recreated another hybrid plan, I think that would have been the ideal situation. What we were able to do by being one of the first 3 into the university plan was we were able to ensure that our hybrid benefits were protected and grandparented under the new plan. So if we weren't at the table, if we weren't some of the founders of this, I don't think that we would have been kind of led into a plan in a way that protected the value of our money purchase hybrid plan. Leslie?
Yep, another question online. If we brought a pension over from another university prior to the conversion period, will those benefits be protected in the new plan?
So if you brought the pension over and you've been credited with that service under the Queen's plan, again, everything that you've earned under the Queen's plan, including recognition for prior service at another university, would be part of your earned benefits. Again, some of these questions, I strongly encourage. I'm saying, absolutely talk to Bob Weisnagel at the pension office. These are our understandings in terms of the plan design, but there may be some individual situations that really require more careful consideration and advice from the pension office. Well, if there are no more questions, thanks for everyone for coming out.